Okay, so it's good to see everyone today. And as we prepare and study today, the portion that Gabe Eber is on, and it's his daughter's bat mitzvah. Thank God, this coming Shabbat, poo poo poo. We'll be celebrating with Dina as she becomes bat mitzvah, and these two portions, it's a double portion this week, Tazria and Metzora, and we're on page 649 in the Eitz Chaim. Whatever edition of Chumash you have, look for the portion Tazria, which is Leviticus chapter 12. So these two portions are in some ways the most disgusting portions in the entire Torah. Not in terms of, ethics or laws presented that could be challenging, like laws of slavery or laws of warfare, things like that. I'm not talking from that perspective. I'm talking about gory details about the most intimate things that could happen to our body. And over the course of two portions, these are read, and it makes it kind of challenging to celebrate a bar or bat mitzvah when it's associated with these portions, because you like to associate a bar or bat mitzvah, with giving the Torah at Mount Sinai, or the creation of the world, or the Ark. Noah's Ark, something fun, or something that you can sink your teeth into and has something to do with the future of becoming bar bat mitzvah. But these portions, Tazria, Metzora, it makes it a challenge. But Dina, she prepared a speech, as all the B'nai Mitzvah students do, and I can say assuredly that Dina's speech is excellent. And it has a wonderful modern take to these portions. So we'll look forward to celebrating this Shabbat. I want us to, the blessing for Torah study, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech olam, shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So I want us to look below the line. So if you don't have the Eitz Chaim, just listen in. But you'll see on page 649 the lengthy commentary below the line to kind of help us put these portions in context. So let's just read the beginning of Tazria. I'm going to read it in Hebrew and in English before we get to below the line, just to know why we need this extensive commentary. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, God spoke to Moses, saying, Daber el b'nei Yisrael lemor, speak to the people of Israel, saying, Isha ki Tazria. So we're just starting to look at the portion Tazria, 649, 650 in the Eitz Chaim. Daber el b'nei Yisrael lemor, speak to the people of Israel, saying, Isha ki Tazria v'yalda zachar. When a woman at childbirth. So Tazria means to give forth a seed. That's really what Tazria means. Zeroa, like the zeroa on the Seder plate, that's an arm. But Zayin Resh Ayin is the root, the three-letter root, Zera, and Zera means seed. It can also mean descendants, that kind of, you're spreading your seed that way. So Tazria, giving forth a seed, is translated here as childbirth. Okay, so when a woman at childbirth, v'yalda zachar, and gives birth to a male, v'tam'a shivat yamim, she will be tameh, she will be impure So that extensively, the commentary on 649 explains that concept of purity versus impurity, what it means to be tameh. V'tam'ah shivat yamim. She will be impure for 7 days. Kiamei di nidat devota titma. As at the time of her, she shall be impure as at the time of her menstrual infirmity. Uvayom hashmini yimol bisar orlato. And on the 8th day, his foreskin shall be circumcised. Ushloshim yom ushloshet yamim teshev bidmei tahara. For 33 days, she shall remain in a state of blood purification. Bechol kodesh lo tiga. Any sacred thing she should not touch. Ve'el hamikdash lo tavo, and to the sanctuary she shouldn't approach. Ad melot yemei tahara, until the days of her purification are fulfilled. So 7 plus 33, 40 days for a male child. V'im nekeva teleid, if she gives birth to a female. V'tam'ah shivu'ayim kenidata, she shall be impure 2 weeks as during her menstruation. V'shishim yom v'sheshet yamim, and 66 days teshev al demei tahara, she should sit in a state of blood purification. So 14 plus 66, that is 14 and 66, 80 days, right? Uvimlot yemei tahara, at the fulfillment of her purification days, levain olavat, for a son or a daughter, so 40 for a son, 80 for a daughter. Tavi keves ben shnato la'olah, she should bring a yearling lamb for a burnt offering. And uven yonah, or a pigeon, o tor, or a turtle dove, lechatat, for a sin offering, el petach ohel moed el hakohen, to the entrance of the tent of meeting, to the kohen. Vehi krivo lifnei Adonai, and he will sacrifice it before God. V'chiper aleha, and atone for her. V'taharab mimakor dameha, and purify her from the source of her blood. Zot Torat hayoledet, this is the law for one who gives birth, for lazachar o lanekeva, for a male or for a female. Ve'im lo timtza yada deiseh, and if she can't, if she doesn't have the means to acquire. Now, in other words, the literal is if her hand can't find, meaning if she doesn't have the means accessible for a seh, for this lamb or goat, v'lakha shtei torim, she should take 2 turtle doves, o shnei b'nei yonah, or 2 pigeons, echad la'olah v'echad l'chatat, 1 for the burnt offering, 1 for the sin offering, v'chiper aleha hakohen v'tahera, and the kohen would atone for her and purify her. So a wealthy woman giving birth gives a yearling sheep or goat, and a pigeon or a turtle dove. If she doesn't have the means, then it's 2 pigeons, 2 turtle doves to do. We know for sure from archaeological discoveries around the temple in Jerusalem that there were pigeon sellers in the marketplace right outside the temple precincts, so that women could be able to buy these turtle doves for the offering. Okay, so there are a lot of challenges to this. Why is childbirth an impure experience? Why is the impurity? Why does the impurity last double for a girl than for a boy? Right? Why is it a week first for a boy and 2 weeks first for a girl, and then 33 more days for a boy 66 more days for a girl. Why all of that? No reason given here, but these are the questions that come to mind about this portion Tazria, which is the first time we get we encounter the concept of tum'ah, which is the Hebrew word for impurity, or if we want to be, if we don't want to be negative about it and use a negative word, impurity is a negative word because it means not pure. But tameh is just the status you are in when you are not tahor. So there is a purification status that one is in, and then there's the tum'ah, the tum'ah status that one is in. And one doesn't necessarily have to, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that there's something happening in your body. You could just touch something inadvertently that happens to be impure, and that makes you tameh. Like walking into a cemetery. If we walk into a cemetery, we become tameh. There's nothing about our body that makes it that. It's just that the status of the cemetery itself, which is that for the Torah, the idea is that corpses have the highest level of tum'ah, of impurity about them, because you don't even have to be in contact with the corpse. You just have to be in the precinct, in the air of the corpse, for you to be in the status then of being tameh. So tameh, you can't, it's kind of hard to define. It's the status that affects your spiritual sanctity. It has nothing to do with hygiene, right? So purity, impurity, in other words, the idea of washing our hands before saying hamotzi, saying the blessing al natilat yadayim before saying hamotzi, which is the tradition, symbolizes purification. It's easily misunderstood as cleanliness, right? So when the Black Plague occurred in the 1300s in Europe, the Jews were killed because they weren't dying in as many numbers as non-Jews were throughout Europe. So people thought that there's something about the Jews that made them different. Maybe they poisoned the wells. Why weren't the Jews dying? And people thought, well, it's the cleanliness, the netilat yadayim, and going to the mikveh that could have saved the people during that time. Well, yes, it is more, well, if you think about it, netilat yadayim can't be done with soap. It's only done with water. How much does water really clean you? Well, I guess if you're not cleaning at all and you're using water and your neighbors aren't cleaning at all, right? I heard, I don't know, why did people get married in June? Well, and why did the bride carry flowers? Well, the bride, nobody was having a bath. So if you're carrying the flowers and you can get married outside because June is warm enough to do that, well, then you don't smell as bad. So people just didn't go to the bathhouse. People weren't clean. It was a cultural thing. In Arab society, the going to the bathhouse was a common thing. In Roman times, if you go to Masada, you see the bathhouse, the remnants of the bathhouse there, right? So maybe only the wealthy went could afford it and went to the bathhouse. So we should not, though, understand the purification process as a cleanliness process. It has nothing to do with that. It has all to do with this sense of spirituality, things about our body that affect our spiritual status, and things in the world that if we touch them could affect our spiritual status too. So that's just the beginning of an understanding. Let's now look at the below the line commentary on 649 and see how 20 years ago, when the Eitz Chaim Chumash was first published, I think it's about 20 years ago. Yes, 2001, exactly 20 years ago. So,
Rabbi,
yes, Saul.
why should God be concerned about a woman's menstruation cycle, and he's obviously, since it's in Leviticus, he's trying to tell the priest what to do.
Exactly.
But it's right. Just strange.
Yes, it is strange. It is natural. So I can't answer your question, Saul. I really don't know. One aspect of this is, we could say that, so you asked the question in the traditional way we understand the Torah being written. Why is God concerned about this? So that's one way to look at this, as if God is writing the Torah. But if we look at it from a biblical scholarly perspective, the idea is that men wrote the Torah. So men could be writing these laws from their perspective, since men don't bleed in a natural way like that and in a regular way. Women do. Women are different. I'm just putting it in a positive way. Women are different, and therefore, since women are different, they have to have these extra restrictions because something's happening to them that's not happening to us men. And because of that, we, the men, are saying the women have to do this in order to be at the level, the sacred spiritual level that we men are. Okay, so that's one perspective on this. Another perspective is from ancient times until today, there's a whole taboo system, this whole idea of what blood means, right? And from the book of Genesis, from the very beginning, we know that the blood equals life, and we're not supposed to consume blood. And so when blood stems from the source of life, then that blood is different from blood that might be spewing from any other part of the body. How do we treat the blood of an animal that is slaughtered before it's sacrificed, right? And the blood of the animal is sprinkled onto the altar, depending on the type of sacrifice it is. And what do we do with the rest of the blood of the animal? All of this about blood has a lot of bizarre and I would say archaic kind of understandings that are difficult for us today in 2021 to accept. Since we are more familiar with medical science, we know what all this is about. But the rabbis 2,000 years ago and the Torah 3,300 years ago did not know, which gets back to your question, why would God command this? But God should know all about medical science, right? So that's another aspect of what the below the line commentary tries to make sense of. And that is, because we are moderns, because we're familiar with how the body works, that we might be put off by these commandments that we read here that are just don't make sense for our lives today. However, in traditional circles today, married women still go to the mikveh once a month. And so married women today, well, let me say it this way. The married women who go to the mikveh tend to be Orthodox women. So in Orthodox circles, it's still accepted that men and women are separate. They don't daven together. They just have different statuses in the community, right? In non-Orthodox circles in modern Judaism, that concept is not an accepted concept anymore. Men and women are the same. So what if women's bodies are different than men's bodies? It doesn't mean that we have to act differently about it. It doesn't make them any different than us. And why should only women have to go to the mikveh once a month because of what's happening in their body? So it requires a lot of interpretation of the ritual in order to make it meaningful to a modern feminist, egalitarian Jew, whether man or woman, right? So there's challenge to that, and just the idea that a woman has to be impure for 80 days after a birth of a girl, but only 40 days for a birth of a son, also questions that whole this whole thing too. So it's a tremendous challenge for the modern egalitarian non-Orthodox Jew. So which lends itself to say, why are we even reading this, right? So we alter the text of the prayer book to recognize that men and women are equal, right? So we add Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah's name to the Amida and see that as standard practice that should be done, right? So we allow anyone aside from our cantor who leads the service, and that happens at the weekday services, are given the option of adding the Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah's name or not. It's their option. So that's our compromise. But when our cantor leads the service, the cantor has to say Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. So we add that to the service. We change the formula of the opening preliminary blessings at the start of the service from who has not made, thank God for not making me a woman, to thank God for making me in God's image, right? So we change that. And we alter things about looking forward to the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. We remember the sacrifices there instead of in the Orthodox prayer book when it says we look forward to sacrifices being brought again. So we do change things in our prayer book to highlight our more modern or evolving understanding of what it means to be Jewish. So why don't we change the Torah too? And that's a good question, which because I'm 59 years old and I was brought up in a traditional conservative Jewish home, I'm not conservative with a capital C for the denomination of Judaism. I'm not ready to cut out things from the Torah yet, where I could imagine that my younger colleagues might be tempted to do so. And if so, I'm not there yet to say we should skip Tazria and Metzora completely and forget about it. I think it is important to understand these portions in context, and that's how I understand it. And that's why understanding it in context requires a whole page of commentary on 649 to try to understand this portion today. Whereas it would be easier to skip it, I'm not in favor of skipping. I'm in favor of understanding how Judaism has evolved in 3,300 years. And I think that is powerful. So let's take a look at the.
Rabbi, can I ask one more question?
Yes, go ahead, Saul.
Okay, so we're in Leviticus, and during what we just read, God is directing the priests to do some sacrifices.
Right.
So we know that sacrifices in the temple have been replaced by reading the Amida.
Yes.
What prayers, or what do we do to replace these sacrifices when women have to get purified?
Okay, that's right. So there's nothing to replace them today, because the only way, right? So the rabbis understood. So we'd have to look at the Mishnah and the Talmud that deals with all the laws of purity and impurity, where they say that everything today, that is today being for the rabbis, when the temple is destroyed, everything today about ritual impurity can't be done. So we all live in a state of ritual impurity because there's no way that we can bring the requisite sacrifices to become pure. So the rabbis say that we all live in a state of ritual impurity, except women, married women once a month. Because what married women once a month don't have to bring a sacrifice to mark the end of their impurity stage. All they have to do is go to the mikveh. So it's usually however many days of bleeding plus 7 clean days. That's then the end of that 7th day is the day for the married woman to go to the mikveh. So because there's no sacrifice associated with that monthly cycle, the rabbis say that is maintained even though the temple is destroyed. And the only other symbolic thing we do, two other symbolic things we do, we wash our hands before we say hamotzi to remind us of how the Kohanim would wash their hands before doing a sacrifice. And we wash our hands after being in a cemetery, which is purely symbolic, because the only way to become purified after being in contact with the dead is to undergo the red heifer ceremony. So you need a red heifer, which is an up to 3-year-old cow, red being that totally red hair, or which is brownish reddish hair, which is a very unusual kind of cow. And that has to be slaughtered and sacrificed on the altar and burned to ashes. And those ashes have to be mixed with water, and that has to be sprinkled on someone who has come into contact with the dead in order to become purified. So since that happens in a temple, and no, there is no temple, where the symbolic washing our hands after being in a cemetery is just that, symbolic. So we are all impure. Even married women who go to the mikveh, who should be purified that day, if they've ever been to a cemetery or to a funeral or to a hospital, are still impure. Okay? So, but for the rabbis, again, rabbis who are men have said that married women still need to go to the mikveh. So, yeah, so that's just in the discussion of the rabbis in the Mishnah and in the Talmud, how they made that. So we only have a slight remnant of all of these laws of ritual purity and impurity today, a very, very slight remnant. So that in the time of the rabbis, the whole idea of ritual purity was much more extensive, and people were much, much more careful had to be more careful about that when the temple was standing than they are today. And since it's 2,000 years since the temple was destroyed, we really have no concept of what it means to live in this kind of world in which we're seeing things as either pure or impure, right? We just don't look at the world in that way, the way that the Torah is trying to make us look at it. Okay, so yeah, Sylvia, go ahead.
Yes, I did unmute. Perhaps then that when you said that that it said that thank God for not making me a woman.
Yeah.
To me, in a very simple way, is because men couldn't possibly do all the things that are required as women are.
Yeah, that's as a woman talking. I agree with you. I agree. I agree with you. So much more complicated to be a woman than it is to be a man. Like saying, right, all the things that the woman has to do, all the things that a woman has to do in the home and taking care of the family, all of that. So maybe it's that too. Well, the way I understand it is thank God for not making me a woman means thank God that I have all the obligations to observe all the commandments, whereas women are exempt from doing most of the commandments. Okay, so that's, again, so all of these, that's why changing the wording of it, no matter how you understand the original wording, and no matter how you explain it, it doesn't come out nice. And so it's better when the conservative movement in 1946 in the Black Silverman prayer book changed the wording to Sha'asani B'Tsalmo, who has made me in his image, in God's image. That's a much more positive thing to say. No, there's no way to practice the red heifer today, Arnie. There's no, you need the temple in Jerusalem in order to do it. There have been articles that I've seen every now and then in Jewish social media and print media where a red heifer has been found, like a red heifer has been born on a farm, on a kibbutz in Israel or some other place in the world. And maybe that's the sign that the Messiah is coming because of how unusual it is for a red, an all red cow to be born. So maybe that's a sign that the Mashiach is coming. Well, clearly the Mashiach hasn't come, because I remember when I was in rabbinical school that one of those articles came out. So yeah, the Mashiach hasn't come in my 32 years since I was ordained. So we're still waiting. So no, there's no way to do the red heifer without a temple in Jerusalem. Yeah. So so prayer is the substitute for all of these, most of these sacrifices. I'm receiving a lot of texts. I just have to respond to one. I'm sorry. Okay. Fine. Sorry about that. So prayer is a substitute for sacrifice today, and that's another thing about reading the entire book of Leviticus. You have this all this sacrificial system described here, which makes absolutely no sense to us today. The only aspect that makes some sense is the idea of making a donation to a charitable cause is only a slight substitute for taking something of your property and offering it up to God. So we just don't have anything, Pidyon Haben, redemption of the firstborn son. Right, even that is totally misunderstood today too, and because it's so difficult to do, it's so rarely done. That's what I mean, not difficult. It's just rarely done. It's a firstborn son, right? So because firstborn of all things, first fruits, first animals, first people belong to God. So first people that belong to God, well, it's firstborn son. And it's only if the son is the firstborn. So it's not girl first, then boy, and that boy is the first boy, but he's not the firstborn to the mother. It's the firstborn to the mother, natural, so not cesarean, but natural birth. And mother and father have to be Israelites, right? So if either mother or father is a Kohen or a Levi, then it's not done. So it's rare that Pidyon Haben is done. So with that, it's because it's so rarely done that people just don't understand this concept of first things belong to God. So it's a lot of the book of Leviticus just doesn't make it. It's hard to make sense of it in modern times, post temple. And the further we get post-temple, the harder it is to understand and appreciate it. So let's see how far we can get in this commentary below the line on 649. After the previous chapter's discussion of how food entering our bodies can make us ritually impure, the Torah now discusses how that which comes out of our bodies can do the same. All right, so this is an interesting connection. However, the things that come out of our body are not related to what we eat. Let's just leave it that way, in that clean way. Okay, I'm not talking, so this isn't talking about number one or number two, which would relate then to what you eat or drink. This isn't related to that. This is related to other things that flow from our bodies that are not related to what we eat in any way. Okay? But that's how our commentary is connecting this. I just want to point out that everything that we're reading has nothing to do with things that come out of our body because of what we've eaten or what we have drunk. Second paragraph. Perhaps no concept in the Torah is less accessible to the modern reader than the notion of tum'ah, generally translated as uncleanness. So I have been translating it as impurity, although it has no connection to one's physical sanitary condition, right? Uncleanness, if you translate it as clean, tahor meaning clean or pure, versus tameh versus being unclean or impure. So certainly if you translate it clean or unclean, you think of sanitary or hygiene, and has nothing to do with that. If you think of pure and impure, then it's less related to that. One contracts tum'ah, ritual impurity, through contact with a dead body, by being afflicted with sara'at, leprosy, although not the disease known by that name today. It's some kind of skin ailment, which is later in this portion and the next portion. Metzora talks about that, which we're not going to have time to look at today. Or by contact with a bodily emission that touches on the generation of life, such as menstrual blood, semen, or flow from the reproductive organs. Right? So spit does not make you, is not rich. Let me say it this way. That's another fluid from our body, right? Spit or sweat, which is not listed here among things that flow from our body. Spit or sweat are dependent upon the person's status. If the person is tahor, then their spit and their sweat is pure. If the person is impure, then their spit or their sweat is impure. So now, this came up in the Daf Yomi a couple of days ago about in the tractate Shekalim, which was a bizarre tractate. Anybody who read that for Daf Yomi, it was really some bizarre stuff in there. But a lot of it had to do with the temple in Jerusalem. Part of it was when people were, what part of the street should you walk on? Should you walk on the side, or should you walk in the middle of the street? So you should generally walk in the middle of the street if you're pure, because the impurity is on the side of the street. However, when Jerusalem is more crowded, like on a festival and a lot of people are in town, you should keep to the side rather than stay in the middle to try to avoid crowds. So all of that is related to where the spit is going to be found in this. Is it going to be found in the middle of the street, or is it going to be found in the side of the road? So that might have been a disgusting kind of tangent, but I'm just to highlight a little bit what the rabbis discuss in terms of what flows from our body and what makes us impure and what can make others impure by touching it, right? So it's first degree uncleanness. So if I am unclean anything that I touch becomes unclean. That's first degree uncleanness. Somebody else comes along and touches that, that's second degree. So the second degree uncleanness, how far does it extend? And to what impurities does it extend? So these are the types of discussions that the rabbis have in their discussion on different laws of purity and impurity. Okay. A woman, near the end of this paragraph, a woman who has just given birth is likewise considered ritually impure. Tum'ah bars one from approaching God's sanctuary. Sara'at isolates one from human contact, sara'at being the skin disease. Tum'ah has unmistakable negative connotations. It is defined by what one may not do, and the Torah tells us how to be relieved of it. It need not, however, imply wrongdoing on the part of the affected person. Right? This is what I pointed out at the beginning. When one is tameh, it's not because one has done something wrong or is a terrible person. One is tameh by nature, a woman once a month, a woman giving birth. Those are natural things happening, or by contact with someone or something that is impure. So there's nothing about your character that is affected when you are tameh, right? You are not, when you are tameh, you do not become an evil person. Or an evil person is not by definition tameh. Right? An evil person can be ritually pure. An evil person can be in a pure state to bring the Passover sacrifice. It has nothing to do with one's moral character. It's purely about the physical conditions by which we define purity and impurity. Okay, so that's another thing about this whole concept. Admittedly, in parentheses, as some commentators have noted, the Torah itself provides a basis for that interpretation when it calls for a purification offering to be part of its prescribed process of reintegration. Tum'ah seems to be the result of coming in contact with an awesomely potent force that disqualifies one from approaching the sanctuary, right? So a potent force which is mysterious and not understood, right? So biological, reproductive fluids are just seen by the rabbis as being this powerful sort, blood stemming from the source of birth, or fluid that the rabbis understood led to conception and the formation of life. That's all the rabbis knew about those fluids. Beyond that, it was mysterious and maybe even God-given sources of life, and perhaps understanding it that way, then because there's some element of God in those fluids that would, and if you come into contact with them, then that makes you impure, that you weren't ready or able spiritually to handle that idea. So I think just thinking about it that way, that these are godly sources of power, could then, right, only slightly can we compare this to how we approach the Torah. So we approach the Torah with reverence, always standing when the ark is opened, always standing when the Torah is paraded around the sanctuary, and when we approach the Torah, not touching the parchment, let alone the letters and the words with our own fingers, representing this whole idea. There's God in that text, in the scroll itself, and we have to approach it with reverence and with sanctity. So how we understand the Torah scroll is a little entree into how we understand this whole concept of ritual purity related to these particular fluids. Okay. Right. So yeah, which is reflected in this proof that tumah is not totally negative condition can be found not only in its association with such religiously affirmed activities as childbirth and caring for the dead, but also from the rabbinic rule that scrolls of the biblical books convey tumah to those who touch them, right? Which is what I just said in parentheses here about the Torah scroll itself. We go on. It has been suggested that these categories of ritual impurity were a response to the anxiety triggered by death, serious illness, and the leaking of life-generating fluids from the body. It has been noted further that natural flows require less purification than unnatural flows, which might indicate the presence of disease, right? So it's possible that these life-giving forces, if they're flowing from your body, perhaps you're suffering from a little bit of death, and then because death is impure, then it makes one impure. So do we understand the flowing as a little bit of dying, or do we understand the flowing as this potent life source that is emerging? And then we respond to that accordingly. So it's fascinating discussion about what tumah means. This longer paragraph, and I think then we'll have to conclude for today. Although tumah bars a woman from the sanctuary, we need not see that condition as negative and certainly not as punishment. There is no reason to believe that God ordained menstruation or childbirth as punishment. Pain in childbirth was ordained as a punishment, right? As a result of eating the fruit from the tree that Adam and Eve were forbidden to touch, there were punishments that man has to toil for food, and woman would be in pain in childbirth. So pain in childbirth is a punishment, back from chapter 3 in Genesis, but childbirth itself is not a punishment. There is a natural holiness found in the miracles of pregnancy, birth, and recovery from illness, and there is a stipulated holiness, the arbitrary designation of certain times, places, and activities as sacred. One meets God in the experiences of birth and death, sickness and health, but they are not everyday occurrences. The person who yearns for contact with God on a regular basis must rely on sanctuaries, worship services, and prescribed rituals, all of which are holy only because we have chosen to designate them as holy. Israelite society may have seen the two types of holiness as being mutually exclusive, so that it would not be appropriate for the woman or man who had encountered the vital holiness of childbirth, menstruation, or contact with a dead body to seek the designated holiness of the sanctuary, right? So there are two, the worship service and then your body. And then how do you reconcile the two? A woman who had just given birth might feel the presence of God so strongly in that experience that she would feel no need to go to the sanctuary to find God, although we might be more comfortable with that decision being left to the new mother rather than being written into law, right? So all of this, so one more paragraph and we'll conclude for today. We can see the notion of tumah then as growing out of a sense of reverence for the miraculous nature of birth, the awesome power of death, and the mysteries of illness and recuperation. That this reverence would later be contaminated by superstitious fears related to menstrual blood and contact with the dead need not detract from our efforts to understand and appreciate these chapters of biblical law. So I don't know if the commentary was effective in making this section more relevant to us today, but it just gets to the biblical mindset about God and God's role in the universe today and where we see God, how we understand the mysteries of life and death, right? Things that are beyond our control, and how we respond for the Torah, understanding that God is found in those events in life and death, how we respond to being in contact with the forces that lead to life, that these forces that flow from our bodies. So with that, that'll be all for today. For that, so I'm sorry we didn't get into Metzora at all. Maybe next year we'll get into that. I want to wish a mazel tov to Gabe and his wife Stephanie for Dina's bat mitzvah this coming Shabbat. We're looking forward to celebrating with you. Not in person, unfortunately, but most of us over Zoom, except for your family and I who will be there in person. But we're looking forward to that. So have a good day, everybody. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.